The title of my talk today is Turning Poison into Medicine. And this actually comes more out of the Buddhist tradition, the Nichiren Buddhist tradition. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to just give a shout out to, I think, yeah, Michelle. What you were saying to me fits in so well. The story about the account you just gave about the funeral home, it fits so well because that is an excellent example of taking something that you thought was going to be not feel that good or kind of dowdy or just dreary, and it became medicine. It became something good for your soul that probably is going to edify how you go through the rest of your life. Informs and affirms that. So that was an excellent example, and I want to thank Jose because oh goodness, the way you did that, I said we just had church. We just need to take up the offering and eat, and we're good. We're good. So thank you so much. But what I'm going to start with is, and I like to tell stories, and I got my timer on so that I won't slip into my Baptist ways. I'm going to start with some Buddhist teachings that you all mentioned in the Flame account of the Four Noble Truths, and I'm actually going to start with the Four Noble Truths. The first one the Buddha talked about was suffering, dukkha. Suffering is inevitable. The second Fourth Noble Truth was it's inevitable because we attach our happiness to things that are impermanent. And so then we can even bring in the Bible with this because Matthew 7:24 tells us to build our house on solid ground. And anytime we're building on sand, anytime we're building on things that the nature of them is to change. You know, the fact that we don't even stay here for an eternity. Our soul does, but so much of what we build our lives on is an impermanent nature and is an impermanent effect. And so it creates suffering because we want things the way we want them. The third noble truth is there is a way out. And we have to remember that sometimes we can't accept that because we want the way out. We want it. I was saying Thursday when I spoke, the author Terry McMillan, she wrote Waiting to Exhale, and I can't think of the other book, but that was the most popular one. She says, it's not that I don't trust God. I just don't trust his judgment. And I think a lot of us, Sue, I agree, Sue. I was like, oh my goodness. But I think a lot of us fall into that. You know, I ain't got a problem with God. I just don't always know if he knows what he's doing, you know? And so we miss the way out sometimes because we think we know what's best, not understanding that until you come into a spiritual maturity, God's will is our will. They come into alignment. God would not have you do something that you just don't want to do, not for an eternity. Sometimes it can look that way because like Michelle said in her example, she didn't necessarily want to go to that funeral home. She felt like maybe just one time or whatever. But sometimes when we do we're obedient, we find a greater freedom. We find a greater spaciousness that we can live and move and have our being. Like our prayer partner said this morning from Acts 17:28. And the fourth final noble truth is the way forward. And the way forward that I'll just gently touch on is the eightfold way: right view, right intention, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And if you look at all those, that's a practice. And that's what we talk a lot about in New Thought. And if you're a yoga, it's about the practice. Get on the mat. It's a practice. And so these the Noble Eightfold Way that comes as a result of the Four Noble Truths is a practice. So I'm going to go back to the Nichiren. The Nichiren of Buddhism comes from the Mahayana practice. You got Theravada, Mahayana, and then you have the Tibetan Buddhist practice, which the Dalai Lama actually comes out of. It's interesting that one's the one most popular when it's the smallest one. The Mahayana is actually the greater vehicle. Most Buddhists come out of the Mahayana. And so the Nichiren is an organization coming out of the Mahayana. It was started by a fellow named, back in the 13th century, a Japanese Buddhist named Nichiren, who he fought against the Japanese government a lot. And so he founded this, and then later on, 700 years later, there was another gentleman whose last name was Makagui, who founded the Soka Soka Gakkai organization out of the Nichiren. And they came against a lot of, this is when the Japanese out of World War II wanted people to come under the Shintoism, a Shinto religion, Japanese, based on deities and spirits that are everywhere, and they were coming against that. All right, and then later on came a gentleman named Toda, who was the successor, and he was the one that came against Shintoism. And then he teamed up with a gentleman named Akita, and they decided to fight for pure freedom through the rejection of nationalism, militarism. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because the idea of the poison becoming medicine came out of this group. It came out of this Nichiren Buddhism group, that whatever you've been given, you can take it and make it your own. And so these were the people that were fighting against the Japanese government. Now, what's interesting is Tina Turner actually comes out of this. A lot of the Buddhist people of color they seem to be attracted to the Nichiren. And so they saw it as something that they could align themselves with, coming through the resistance and the challenges they faced as well. And what Tina Turner talks about, as well as Nichiren and everybody else, is whatever you've been given, that is your journey, and that is something you're to work to, that's going to bring you on the other side of the glory and the beauty and whatever else you want to, you need to experience for your journey. A lot of times we thwart our own efforts, we thwart our own journey, because we go, no, and that's one thing we do in New Thought that we really need to work on. Some of us think we're supposed to feel good all the time. We're supposed to be happy all the time. I'm supposed to get what I want all the time. And then when we hit that wall, or we're not feeling that greater spaciousness, we really have the nerve to go, well, what happened? I demanded my good and the universe didn't deliver. The universe was sometimes trying to deliver you a greater good and you couldn't see it. And so then sometimes you have to just that's the wonderful thing about the universe. Whatever you're seeking, it says, yes, I want more. There you go. I want less. There you go. I want to stand right here and stagnate and drown. There you go. Whatever it is that you're seeking, you can have that and so much more of it. So we're talking about the idea of turning the poison into the medicine. Whatever that bitterness is, what is it here to teach me? There's another idea I share with you. It's called teleology. And teleology is beyond the idea of why is this happening to me. Teleology is a philosophical branch that deals with what has this come to teach me? How will this shape me? How will this make me a better person? It's a whole branch of philosophy that goes back to the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers. Viktor Frankl, in his Man's Search for Meaning, and this was a gentleman that lived through the Holocaust, he took this phrase from German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche that says, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. He who has a why can bear almost any how. So no matter what that poison is, if my why is big enough, I'm going to figure out how to move through. I'm going to figure out what is my how. So the story I'll tell you, when I was 7 years old, I decided to create my own world in my head. Everything that was going on, the teachers were boring, the other children in the class were boring. So I created my own world, and I lived there for a whole year. And for a year, I didn't hear anything anybody said to me, because my world was much more interesting to me. The following spring, when it's time to go take the test, the standardized test they give you, I failed miserably because I had not heard anything for the past year. I didn't understand any of the concepts. And so they put me in what they call Title I. They put me with the slow children. And so it took me a while to figure out. No, it didn't. It didn't take me long to figure out what was happening. But I remember hearing my parents whispering, and I was like, well, this can't be good. I hear my name in whispers, and everybody's talking to me kind of like, how are you today? You okay? And so they would come get us out of class, and they would line us up in front of everybody. And I don't think the teachers were being malicious. They were just wanting to talk to one another. But those of us who were lined up had to sit there and watch the children who were of good intelligence just sit there and stare at us and wonder, well, where are they going to take them? So they take us to this special class. And I remember sitting there, and Miss Saxon was at the board, writing on the board. And there was a young lady next to me, young girl next to me named Margaret. And she says, Margaret, what are you doing? What are you doing now? And Margaret says, nothing. I'm not doing anything. And Miss Saxon said, that's just it, Margaret. You never do anything. And I sat there and I said, oh my God, I got to get out of here. I'm going to die here. I'm just like, I can't stay here next to Margaret. Me and Margaret are going to die together. And so I could have taken that idea, because a lot of people do, when they put in places they don't want to be, that was a poison. I could have sat there and been like, well, this is where they placed me. This is my lot in life. This is where I just have to be. But I made up my mind. I said, Sonja, you got to get your little 8-year-old self together, and you got to figure out how to get out of this. And so my mom helped me. She saw that I was determined. Every evening she would work with me. But the first thing I realized I had to do was pay attention, because that was the thing I was lacking. I tuned everybody out. The world I created in my head was more fun for me, but that world was dangerous. So I listened to Miss Saxon, and I listened to Miss Long. I made sure I listened to Margaret. I made sure I was hearing everything everybody was saying around me, what that meant for them, for me. I was making sure I understood my environment, because that's what I wasn't doing. In a year's time, the next year when the standardized test came by, I tested out. I actually tested on the 7th grade level. And so then that created another flux. So the letters started flying, because they had never seen anything like that before. She tested in, and a year later she tested out. And my mom, of course, my parents were happy. So then I shot up the following year when they did the textbook. I shot up to the top of the textbook. And that created another flux, because all the smart children had decided who they were the smart children and who was the smartest and who was second smartest. And so the fact that I came up from the bottom and shot up to their level and then was competing with them, that started off. I remember hearing them fighting about, how did she get in that reading book? I think the book was called Serendipity or something. How did she get in Serendipity? And so then I had to learn how to deal with, well, I didn't. I chose not to deal with any of it. Because what that experience taught me was, to make my poison become medicine, I had to stay focused on my world, not individually like selfish, but what's happening, what's important. And that was not important. That issue they were dealing with those textbooks, that was their issue. That wasn't my issue. It was their issue to learn to accept me as I had accepted me. And so after that, I stayed the top of my class until I went to the 12th grade, graduated top 10%, Beta Club, Honor Society, and all that sort of a thing. When I was graduating from high school, I saw Margaret, because we all stayed together. But when I went to a magnet high school for math and science, and they did not allow us in the magnet program to talk to the students who weren't in the magnet program. I mean, so the division begins early in life. And so we were standing there with our caps and gowns and robes and cords, and I looked over across the hall and I saw Margaret, and I literally hadn't seen her since 3rd grade when I got out of that class. We had never spoken. And I looked over at her, and she just kept staring at me, and she kept staring at me. And like I said, you weren't supposed to break that line, but she did. I saw her break out of her line, and she comes towards me, and I was like, even I'm thinking, oh my God, she's going to break the line. And so she comes over to me, and she looks at me, and she says, how did you do it? That was all she said. I had not spoken to her since 3rd grade. We're in the 12th grade, and she says, how did you do it? And I just sat there and I looked at her, and I didn't have words back then. I said, I don't know. I don't know. And she said, yes, you do know. How did you do it? I said, I don't know. And she turned around and she walked back and went back on her side and stood over there. But I just felt that connection we made then, she still wanted to know how to turn her poison into medicine. I don't know if she ever figured it out, but I think even as early, we come into this world knowing who we wanted to be. And I know I did not want to stay in that status, in that stratosphere with that branding on me. And so I think this Buddhist, I figured out early on, I didn't know these things, but I knew something within me knew that this was an impermanent place. I did not have to stay here. There was a way out, and the way out was for me, like I said, 8-year-olds, I didn't know right speech, right intention, but I knew that I had to be more honorable with my time. and with my word, and do the things my 8-year-old self was to do, which at that point in my life was to pay attention to my teachers, pay attention to what's said to me, listen to when I'm being taught things. And that was the lesson that I learned, and I've taken that into my adult life. Another thing I learned from that experience is people really do talk to you different when they feel like you don't understand things. And so with me spending a year there in that space, I learned now I know how to take big concepts and break them down so everybody can understand them. And that's from that year. Once again, that was a poison that I turned into a medicine that helps me now. I used to be a stockbroker, and I'm still a financial counselor for, I'm a regional supervisor for a military contractor where I oversee 20 counselors who help with active duty, National Guard, Reserve, and there's one more. Yeah, I think that's the 3 of them. And I'm able to help my counselors explain big things such as the retirement system. And I know that comes from the time that I spent there turning that poison into a medicine. So that's my talk for you today, that no matter what you may have been handed, and you can go back and look at Tina Turner's life, no matter what you may have been handed, it can be for good. You make the decision if it's going to stagnate you, keep you in a certain place, just as you make the decision that you're going to use it as a platform to elevate yourself, to serve not only your beautiful self, but the world. So I thank you so much for this time. I hope I've blessed you. Namaste.